Now I have everything I need. Let me write the new story. The pen barely made a sound when I signed. The closing attorney slid the folder back across the table, smiled like he did this 100 times a week, and said, "Congratulations, Miss Hartley. It's all yours." I stared at the keys sitting in front of me on that laminate table. 2 silver, 1 brass. Small enough to fit in my fist. The kind of thing you'd lose in the bottom of a purse without thinking. But I sat there holding them like they were something holy, because to me, they were. Mine. The apartment was mine. Nobody tells you what it actually takes to get to that moment when you're a 29-year-old ER nurse who grew up in a house where money was a mood, not a plan. Nobody tells you about the years of overnight shifts, the holidays you worked while everyone else made memories, the 3 years you ate the same rotation of 6 meals because anything fancier felt like a luxury you hadn't earned yet. Nobody tells you about the savings account you treat like a secret because the moment certain people find out you have something, they start telling you who it's supposed to belong to. That's why I didn't tell my brother. I found the apartment the summer before, browsing listings on my phone between patients during a 12-hour overnight. 1 bedroom, 1 bath, 6th floor, corner unit with a window that faced east. Enough natural light to grow things. A small balcony, nothing fancy, just wide enough for 2 chairs and a pot of basil. In a city where I'd spent 4 years renting a basement room from a woman who counted my guests, this apartment looked like a cathedral. I put in the application that same night, still in scrubs, fingers smelling faintly of antiseptic. I told no one. Not my coworkers. Not my closest friend Priya, who would have screamed and made it an event. And definitely not my brother Garrett, or his wife Steph, who had somehow become the unofficial board of directors for every decision I made. Garrett was 3 years older, louder in every room he walked into, and had a habit of treating my life like a group project. When I finished nursing school, he told everyone it was because he'd loaned me $200 in my sophomore year, $200 I'd paid back inside of 3 months. When I got promoted to charge nurse, he told his friends I finally found my footing, like my career was a mystery that solved itself. And 2 years before I signed those papers, when I made the mistake of mentioning I was looking at apartments, he looked me dead in the eye and said, "Why would you blow money on your own place when you could just move in with us?" They had a house in the suburbs, 3 bedrooms, 2 kids, Owen and Maisie, 5 and 7. Steph worked part-time from home. Garrett was in sales, which meant his income arrived in waves, and he lived like every wave was permanent. The spare room in their house had a broken closet door and smelled like the hamster that had died in there 2 years earlier. I'd slept in it once during a snowstorm. Once was enough. But Garrett didn't see it that way. To him, my moving in wasn't charity. It was the obvious solution. You'd save money. The kids love you. Steph needs help with pickups sometimes. That last part stuck in my throat for weeks. Steph needs help with pickups. Like my nursing license was a side gig, and my real value was carpooling. So I kept quiet. I went through the application process alone. I got pre-approved alone. I toured the apartment twice, both times on weekday mornings when I knew Garrett was at work and wouldn't somehow appear in the parking lot. I negotiated, signed, and wired the deposit without a word to anyone in the family. When the keys landed in my hand at that closing table, the first feeling wasn't joy. It was relief. The specific relief of having done something completely on your own terms, without anyone else's opinion, without anyone else's hands on it. I drove to the apartment that afternoon with a box of cleaning supplies, a secondhand mop, and the best coffee I'd ever tasted from the cafe on the corner. I let myself in, stood in the empty living room, and listened. The refrigerator hummed. Traffic moved 6 floors below. Somewhere down the hall, a neighbor was watching something with a laugh track. Normal sounds. Human sounds. Not a single one of them asked anything of me. I sat on the floor with my coffee and cried a little. Not because I was sad, because I hadn't realized how long I'd been holding my breath. Garrett found out the way I always feared he would. Through someone else. I'd been in the apartment 3 weeks when Priya came over for dinner. I'd finally told her the week prior, sworn her to silence, walked her through every room while she gasped and grabbed my arm and said things like, "Avery, you actual legend." We had takeout, opened a bottle of wine, and she took exactly 1 photo. Just the 2 of us in the kitchen, glasses raised, the city blurred behind the window. She posted it the next morning with the caption, "Celebrating my girl and her new chapter. So proud of you, Avery." I saw it at 6:15 a.m. before my shift. My stomach dropped. I called her immediately. She picked up groggy and confused. What? It's sweet. Why are you? Oh, long pause. Oh no, your brother. I asked her to take it down. She did, within minutes. But Garrett had already been awake. He'd already seen it. And he had already screenshotted it, because of course he had, and sent it to our mother in the family group chat with the message, "Did you know about this?" My mother, bless her, replied with a thumbs up emoji and nothing else. Garrett texted me directly 20 minutes later. "Nice apartment. When were you going to tell us?" I read it 3 times on my commute. No exclamation point, no congratulations, just that flat, controlled tone that meant he was working up to something bigger. I didn't respond until that evening. I was going to tell everyone soon. Still getting settled, his reply came back in under a minute. "We should come see it. The kids have been asking about you." The kids had not been asking about me. I'd seen Owen and Maisie 2 weekends ago, and neither of them had asked where I was living. Owen had asked if I could fix a hangnail, and Maisie wanted to know if nurses could legally adopt dogs. They were wonderful and completely uninterested in my real estate situation. But Garrett wasn't asking for the kids. He was staking a claim. Soon, I wrote back. And left it there. He showed up without calling. That's the thing about Garrett. He framed every boundary violation as enthusiasm. I was just in the neighborhood. I figured you'd be home. I didn't think you'd mind. It was a Tuesday. I'd worked a 10-hour shift, stopped at the grocery store, and was standing at my kitchen counter eating crackers over the sink when my intercom buzzed. I didn't recognize the number on the panel. Then his voice. "Avery, it's me. I've got the kids." I considered not buzzing him up. I stood there for a full 4 seconds, cracker in hand, genuinely weighing it. Then I pressed the button, because he was my brother. And Owen and Maisie were 7 and 5 and had done nothing wrong. He came through my door like he was appraising it. That's the only way I can describe it. His eyes went immediately to the ceiling height, then the windows, then the kitchen layout. Owen ran in and immediately opened every cabinet he could reach. Maisie found the balcony and pressed her face against the glass door. "This is nice," Garrett said in the tone people use when they mean smaller than I expected. "Thanks," I said. "I like it." He walked through to the bedroom without asking. I followed. He stood in the doorway, looked at the bed, the dresser, the closet. "Just the one room? It's a 1-bedroom. I kept my voice easy. It's just me." He turned around with a look I recognized from childhood, the one that preceded a suggestion he'd already decided on. "You know, Steph and I were talking. Owen's been struggling with the shared room situation. He's getting older, he needs his own space. We thought maybe on nights when things get loud at our place, he could stay here. Just sometimes. It would be good for him." I stared at him. And he continued like I'd agreed. "Steph's mom is visiting in the spring. We're tight on space. It would only be 2 weeks, maybe 3. You're at the hospital half the time anyway." I kept my voice measured. "Garrett, I just moved in." I know. He waved a hand. "I'm not saying now. I'm just planting the seed." Owen appeared in the hallway holding my good olive oil. "Can I have some of this?" "No, bud." I took it gently and walked him back to the kitchen. When I turned around, Garrett was standing at my dresser, picking up a small ceramic dish I kept my rings in. He turned it over, looking at the bottom like he was checking a price tag. "Put that down, please." He set it down with a little laugh. "Relax. I'm just looking." I opened the front door. "I've got an early shift tomorrow." He gave me a long look. Something flickered behind his eyes. Not hurt exactly, more like recalibration. "We'll figure out the logistics when the time comes," he said, as if the whole thing was already decided and I just needed to catch up. After they left, I stood in the kitchen for a long time. Owen had put the olive oil back in the wrong cabinet. Maisie had left small handprints on the balcony glass. My rings were exactly where I'd left them, but I checked anyway. Garrett texted at 9 that night. "Nice place, Ave. The kids loved it. Let's plan something soon." I turned my phone face down and went to bed. 3 weeks later, I came home from a night shift at 7 in the morning and found a spare key missing from my hook by the door. I kept 2 sets, one for daily use, one emergency backup hung on a little hook inside the coat closet. I noticed the backup missing when I went to hang up my jacket. I stood there staring at the empty hook for a solid 30 seconds, trying to convince myself I'd moved it. I turned the apartment inside out looking. It wasn't there. Garrett had been by once more since that first visit, a quick stop to drop off a box of things from my mother. He'd waited in the entryway while I signed for the box. I'd been distracted, on my phone with the charge nurse about a scheduling issue. He'd been alone in the entryway for maybe 4 minutes. 4 minutes was enough. I sat on the edge of my bed with my coat still on and thought through every possibility. Then I stopped trying to talk myself out of the one that made the most sense. I called my building manager that afternoon. I told him I'd had a family member in my apartment who I no longer trusted with access and asked about rekeying. He said he could have someone up by Friday. I told him to make it Wednesday. Wednesday came. New locks, new keys, new codes on the building entry panel. I didn't tell Garrett. I didn't need to explain myself. But I did something else that week. I contacted a security company and had 2 small cameras installed. One at the front door, angled toward the entry. One in the corner of the living room, barely visible against the baseboard. My neighbor across the hall, a retired school teacher named Mrs. Obi, had given me her number the week I moved in and said to call her if I ever needed anything. I programmed it into my phone under Building Neighbor. Trust. I was careful. Methodical. I didn't announce any of it. But I couldn't rekey what I hadn't realized he'd already used. The call came on a Thursday night. I was in Cincinnati for a 2-day nursing conference, sharing a hotel room with Priya, who was asleep with an eye mask on and earplugs in by 9:30. I was in bed reading when my phone lit up. Mrs. Call Kimyo. Obi. I answered on the first ring and kept my voice low. Is everything okay? She didn't waste time. There are people in your apartment, Avery. I can hear it through the wall. Music. More than one voice. I knocked once and no one answered, but there's definitely movement. I sat up. Priya didn't stir. I slipped out of bed and into the bathroom, shutting the door softly. How long? Maybe an hour. I wasn't sure at first. I thought maybe you'd come back early. But your shoes aren't by the door. She knew my habits. 3 months of living across from someone teaches you their rhythms. My shoes were always outside my door when I was home. She noticed. I pulled up the camera app with my other hand. My fingers felt steady even though my stomach did not. The living room feed loaded. Garrett was on my couch, not sitting. Sprawled, one arm over the back cushion, the remote in his hand, shoes on, feet on my coffee table. Owen was cross-legged on the floor with a bowl of something. Maisie was asleep in the corner chair with a throw blanket, and Steph was in my kitchen, moving around like she was in her own house, opening the fridge, pulling out the leftovers I'd planned to eat tomorrow. I stared at the screen until the shapes stopped blurring. He had a key. A copy of the key that had gone missing. And he had walked into my apartment with his entire family while I was 6 hours away at a conference. Mrs. Obi's voice came back. Avery? I see it, I said, and my voice was quieter than I meant it to be. Thank you. I'm going to handle this. What do you need from me? I thought about it for 3 full seconds. Nothing yet. I'll call you if that changes. Thank you, Mrs. Obi. I stood in that bathroom for a long time after I hung up. The tile was cold under my feet. The camera feed still played on my phone. Garrett laughing at something on the TV, Owen refilling his bowl, Steph pulling out a bottle of wine from the rack I'd bought specifically for a Christmas dinner I was planning. I thought about calling Garrett directly. I imagined what he'd say. Relax. It's just one night. We needed somewhere quiet. You're not even there. I could already hear it. The explanation wrapped around an accusation. The guilt dressed up as logic. So I didn't call him. I called the non-emergency police line instead. I explained the situation clearly. I'm at a work conference. I have cameras. My apartment is occupied without my knowledge or permission by my brother, who obtained a copy of my key during a visit. I am not giving consent for his presence. I'd like an officer to respond. The dispatcher asked twice if I was sure I wanted to proceed, given that it was a family member. I said yes both times. Then I sat on the edge of the hotel bathtub and watched the feed on my phone. About 15 minutes later, a knock appeared on my front door camera. Garrett answered it himself, still holding the TV remote. The expression on his face when he opened the door to 2 officers shifted through 5 emotions in about 4 seconds. He tried to explain. I could see his mouth moving, his hands gesturing. He pointed toward the interior of the apartment, probably claiming permission, probably using my name like a password. The officers came in anyway. Steph stepped out from the kitchen looking pale. Owen stood up from the floor. Maisie woke up confused. I watched Garrett's posture change from entitled to defensive to somewhere small that I'd never seen on him before. One of the officers called me. I answered, confirmed I was the leaseholder, confirmed I was out of town, confirmed I had not given permission for anyone to be there. He said they'd be getting everyone's information and asked if I wanted to press charges. I told him I'd decide in person. I drove back early the next morning. Priya didn't push for details. She just poured me coffee from the hotel carafe and said, "Whatever happened, I've got you." I loved her for that. When I arrived at the building, Mrs. Obi was in the hallway. She handed me a container of jollof rice and said, "You look like you didn't sleep." "I didn't," I admitted. "Good," she said. "That means you were thinking." Thinking people make better decisions than sleeping ones. My apartment smelled like takeout and Steph's perfume. The couch cushions were out of place. Owen's cereal bowl was in the sink, unwashed. The wine rack was 2 bottles lighter. My good blanket, the weighted one I'd saved for and ordered specifically for night shift recovery days, was wadded up in the corner chair where Maisie had slept. I put my bag down and stood in the center of the living room. I didn't clean it yet. I needed to see it first. All of it. What it looked like when someone treated your space like a hotel they hadn't booked. Garrett called while I was standing there. I let it ring. He called again. I let it ring. The 3rd time I picked up. He started talking immediately. "Avery, listen, I know how this looks. Come over," I said. "Bring Steph. Alone. Not the kids." Silence. Then, "Okay." They arrived within an hour. I opened the door and let them in. I didn't offer coffee. I didn't offer seats. I stood in the middle of my living room, arms at my sides, and waited. Garrett started with the framing. The kids were going crazy at home. Owen and Steph's mom had been fighting all week and we just needed one night somewhere neutral. "How did you get in?" I asked. He paused. "I had a key." "From when?" Another pause. "From the first time I came over. I just kept it. I didn't think it was a big deal." "You took a key from my apartment without telling me." "I thought you took a key from my apartment," I said again, "without telling me. And then you used it to bring your family into my home while I was in another city. Without calling me. Without asking. Without my knowledge." Steph opened her mouth. "We weren't hurting anything. You were in my home," I said, looking at her. "Without my permission. That's the only thing that matters here." Garrett's expression shifted to something I'd seen at that first visit, the recalibration. He was looking for the angle, the version of the story that made him reasonable. "Avery, we're family. You have space. We needed one night. If you just answered your phone when I called, I don't owe you my phone or my space." He spread his hands. "I'm not saying you owe us anything. I'm saying family helps each other. You have this whole apartment by yourself. We have 2 kids in a house that's too loud right now. It's not that complicated." And there it was. The logic. The simple, infuriating logic that had followed me, my whole adult life from their direction. You have more than you need. We need more than we have. Therefore, the math is obvious. I looked at him for a long moment. At the brother I'd defended at school when people called him a loudmouth. At the person I'd lent money to twice without a second thought, money I'd never mentioned again because I didn't keep score. At the man who had walked into my apartment with his shoes on and his feet on my table, and watched my television and drunk my wine and put his children to sleep in my chair. When I was 23, I said, "You forgot to pick me up from the airport after a 12-hour shift." I waited 3 hours. I never brought it up. He blinked. "What does that have to do with when I graduated from nursing school and Mom couldn't afford the dinner? I paid for the whole thing. 12 people. I didn't bring it up. Avery, I lent you money twice. I've driven your kids to appointments on my days off. I've covered holiday shifts so coworkers with families could be home. I have been available to this family in every way I know how to be. I kept my voice level, not raised, not shaking. And you walked into my home without my permission, and you're standing here explaining to me why it was reasonable." Garrett was quiet for the first time since he'd walked in. "The police have a report," I said. "Your name is in it. I haven't decided what I'm going to do with it, but I need you to understand something clearly. This apartment is mine. Not ours. Mine. I bought it. I pay for it. I earned it. And the next time you come here, it will be because I invited you, not because you decided." Steph looked at her hands. Garrett looked at the floor. I'm going to ask you to leave now. They left. No slam doors, no dramatic exit. Just the quiet click of the latch behind them. I stood in the living room for a long time after that. The blanket was still wadded in the corner, the wine rack still missing 2 bottles, but something in the room felt different now. More mine, somehow. Like the space had expanded when they walked out. The fallout was exactly what I'd expected, and also nothing like it. Garrett called 3 times that week. I answered once, long enough to hear him say, "I just think you're overreacting," and then I ended the call. My mother called twice. The first time she said she'd heard Garrett's side and thought maybe we could all talk. The second time she said, "I looked up the law, Avery, and technically, I told her I loved her and that I needed some time, and I let her talk herself to a stop." My cousin Diane sent a long text about the importance of family and how these things have a way of getting out of proportion. I read it twice, appreciated that it wasn't hostile, and didn't reply. Priya came over on Saturday with wine she'd actually purchased and spent the evening on my couch the correct way. Invited, seated, present. We talked about other things mostly. Her garden, a patient she'd been following, the conference presentation that neither of us had finished listening to, normal things, the best kind of things. Mrs. Obi knocked on Sunday with a cake and no questions. We ate it standing in my kitchen. At work, a few people knew something had happened. I'd been quiet the last days of the conference, and nurses noticed things. My friend Jada, who'd worked the ICU for 12 years and had the specific calmness of someone who had seen every variety of human crisis, sat next to me in the break room one morning and said, "You handled something hard last week. You doing okay?" "Getting there," I told her. She nodded. "Good. Some things need to be hard before they get better." Garrett did not come by. He didn't buzz the intercom or text through intermediaries or find creative workarounds. I think the police report had made a specific impression. Not shame, exactly. Garrett didn't do shame, but consequence. The word landing somewhere it hadn't before. There was one evening, about 2 weeks after, when I was on the balcony with a cup of tea and I saw a car slow on the street below that looked like his. It idled for a moment, then moved on. I watched until it turned the corner. Then I went back inside, refilled my tea, and sat at the kitchen table with a library book I'd been meaning to start for months. I read 20 pages before I realized my shoulders had dropped. Something I hadn't noticed holding. The new locks were 2 weeks old when I finally let myself feel settled. It happened on a quiet Wednesday morning. I was off. I'd slept a full 8 hours, which almost never happens. I woke up to sunlight coming through the east-facing window, the one that had sold me on the apartment to begin with, and lay there watching the light move across the ceiling for a few minutes without grabbing my phone. Then I got up, made coffee the slow way, with the pour-over I'd bought myself as a move-in gift, and stood at the kitchen counter while the apartment filled with the smell of it. The refrigerator hummed. A bus passed below. "Mrs. Brownlee." Obi's TV murmured faintly through the wall, some morning program she watched every day. Normal sounds. My sounds. I took my coffee to the balcony. The basil I planted in the pot was starting to come in. Small leaves, reaching toward the morning light, doing exactly what they were supposed to do with the space they'd been given. I sat in one of the 2 chairs and drank my coffee and watched the city wake up. I thought about Garrett. About the version of him that used to drive me to the emergency room at 2 in the morning when I was 21 and couldn't afford a cab. About the brother who showed up with groceries after a bad breakup without being asked. That person existed. Still existed somewhere, but he had built something else alongside him over the years. This assumption of access, this idea that my stability was a resource he could draw from when his felt unstable, and the 2 things lived in him at the same time. The generosity and the entitlement, and I had spent years responding to the first, while the second kept taking. I didn't know yet what the future of that relationship looked like. Whether it could be something smaller, more honest, whether he'd ever stand in my doorway again without the weight of everything that had happened. I wasn't ready to think that far ahead. What I knew is this: the door was mine to open or not open. That was new. That was the thing I'd actually bought. I finished the coffee, refilled the cup, sat there until the morning got properly bright. Later, I would reframe the locks, update the entry code one more time, text Mrs. Obi the new one because she'd earned it. I'd file the police report in a folder I hoped I'd never need again and put it somewhere I'd remember. I'd call my mother back, really call. Not to defend myself, but to have a normal conversation about something other than Garrett, because she was my mother and she was separate from all of this, even when it didn't feel like it. But that morning, I just sat, coffee in hand, city below, Basil reaching toward the light. I'd worked every extra shift. I'd declined vacations. I'd eaten 6 rotating meals for 3 years and kept every number in my head and never told anyone what I was building, because I already knew what certain people would do with the information. I'd done all of it alone, quietly, without a committee vote or anyone's approval. And I was sitting in the proof of it. Small, sunlit, entirely mine. I thought about what Jada had said. Some things need to be hard before they get better. The hard part was behind me. The better part was already here, right here, in this chair, with this cup, in this silence no one else had a key to anymore. I let myself stay in it a little longer. I figured I'd earned that much. I used to think the hardest part of building a life was the work itself. The overnight shifts, the skipped vacations, the spreadsheet I kept on my phone tracking every dollar like it owed me something. But looking back now, the hardest part wasn't any of that. The hardest part was deciding that what I built was actually mine to keep. Garrett didn't see it that way. And for a long time, I let his version of things live rent-free in my head, right alongside him trying to live rent-free in my apartment. That's the thing about people who take. They rarely announce it. They frame it. They wrap it in family language, in reasonableness, in the soft logic of, you have more than you need. And if you spent your whole life trying to be the person who shows up, who helps, who doesn't make things difficult, you start to hear that logic as something close to truth. What I understand now is that Garrett's behavior wasn't a single bad decision. It was the result of a long pattern, and I had been part of that pattern. Every time I lent money without asking for it back. Every holiday shift I covered without complaint. Every favor I did quietly so no one would feel awkward. Each of those things on its own came from a place I'm not ashamed of. I wanted to be generous, but generosity without limits teaches people that there are no limits. And eventually, someone will walk through a door you never meant to leave open. That's the cause and the effect, not karma in any cosmic sense. Just the plain human math of what happens when people learn, over years, what you will and won't protect. What changed wasn't Garrett. People like Garrett don't change because you confront them once. What changed was me. I stopped waiting for him to recognize what he was doing and started recognizing what I was allowing. There's a difference between those two things, and it took a camera feed from a hotel bathroom in Cincinnati to make it clear to me. The discipline it takes to hold a line with family is a different kind of discipline than the one that gets you through nursing school or 3 years of meal prepping or a savings account you protect like a secret. It's quieter and lonelier, and nobody gives you credit for it, but it's the kind that actually determines what your life looks like. Avery Hartley, me. I'm not a hard person. I don't think what I did was cold. I think it was the first completely honest thing I'd done inside that relationship in years. I told the truth about what the apartment was. I told the truth about what I would and wouldn't accept. And when Garrett stood in my living room trying to reframe trespassing as family solidarity, I didn't argue the framing. I just held the line. That's what I want to remember most. Not the police report, or the locks, or even the satisfaction of watching him run out of words. I want to remember what it felt like to stand in the center of a room I'd earned and know, without any doubt, that I had the right to decide who stood in it with me. That knowledge doesn't come from success. It comes from choosing yourself, consistently, even when the people around you call it selfishness. Even when it costs something. Even when the silence afterward feels heavy. Mrs. Obi brought cake. Priya sat on my couch the right way. The basil on the balcony kept growing, and I drank my coffee in the morning light and felt, maybe for the first time, like a person who had actually arrived somewhere. That's what discipline and honesty and quiet courage actually build. Not just apartments. A life you don't have to apologize for.